Every person who grew up in Ashford House has returned as an adult, but none of them were ever seen leaving again. Ethan Price never wanted to set foot in Ashford again. He'd buried that house, buried the memories, long ago. But when the letter came, stamped and official, declaring him the sole inheritor of the estate, he felt something tighten around his chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't grief. It was gravity. The house was pulling him back. He drove in silence through winding country roads that seemed narrower than he remembered, trees leaning over the pavement like skeletal guardians. His phone had no signal out here. He wasn't surprised. Ashford had always existed on the edges of things, edges of towns, edges of memory, edges of reason. The moment the house came into view, Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. There it was. Ashford House. Its peaked roof and sun-bleached siding still loomed at the end of the cracked driveway. The shutters hung loose on rusted hinges, and the porch sagged with age, but it was unmistakable. The house he grew up in. The house his mother had died in. The house he swore, at 12 years old, he would never, ever return to. He killed the engine and sat for a long time, staring at the front door. The air outside seemed unnaturally still. Not a bird. Not a breeze. Just that door. His keys jingled in his hand, but his palm was damp. His heart beat in his ears. Still, he got out. The crunch of gravel underfoot sounded deafening in the silence. He mounted the creaking porch steps. They bowed beneath his weight as though remembering him. The key turned too easily in the lock, as if it had been waiting. The air inside smelled exactly as he remembered, dust, cedar, and the faintest trace of his mother's perfume, something floral, long discontinued. Ethan's stomach knotted. He stepped into the living room. The furniture had been covered with white sheets, ghostly silhouettes frozen in place. Dust motes swirled in the stale air. The grandfather clock against the wall ticked faintly, though he was certain it had been broken when he was a boy. Something brushed against his memory. He was 10 years old, running down this hallway, his bare feet slapping the wood, his mother calling after him, no, not calling. Whispering. Pleading. But when he tried to follow the memory, it slipped away. Ethan shook it off and climbed the stairs. Each step groaned beneath him like an old throat clearing. He paused at the landing. His bedroom door, his old bedroom, stood slightly ajar. He hadn't left it that way. He was certain of it. Hand trembling, he pushed it open. Everything was gone. No bed, no posters, no toys. The room was bare, stripped of floorboards and cracked wallpaper. But across one wall, faint as chalk, were drawings. Childlike drawings. Stick figures. Houses. A crude tree. And there, drawn in harsh black strokes, was Ashford House. Ethan felt his blood run cold. He stepped closer. There were more figures drawn near the house. Small ones. Children. Their faces scratched out. A shiver rattled his spine. He reached out to touch one of the drawings, and froze. A whisper. So soft he almost dismissed it as the creak of the house. But then it came again. A low voice, brushing against his ear from the empty hallway. Welcome home. Ethan spun around. No one was there. The hallway stretched empty, shadows clinging to the corners. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow in the silence. Great. Talking houses. Just what I needed. But deep down, he didn't believe it was his imagination. The words hadn't just been sound. They had carried weight. Warmth. As though the house itself had breathed them into him. Night fell faster than he expected. He found himself downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lamp turned on. He hadn't unpacked, hadn't eaten. Just sat there, listening. The tick of the grandfather clock filled the silence like a heartbeat. Every now and then, he swore he heard faint movement upstairs. A shuffle. A step. The sound of something dragging across the floor. At midnight, the house groaned as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath all day. Ethan's phone lit up. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Yet the screen flickered. A notification. A single voicemail. The number was his own. Ethan's throat went dry. He pressed play. A harsh burst of static filled the speaker. Then a voice, his voice, rasped through the distortion. Don't stay the night. Don't let it keep you. Get out before. The message cut to silence. Ethan stared at the phone, heart hammering. That was his voice. Older. Tired. Desperate. His eyes lifted to the darkened stairway. At the top, where the shadows thickened, something shifted. Just barely. And then the whisper came again, louder this time, curling down the stairs like smoke. Welcome home. Ethan didn't sleep that first night. He sat at the kitchen table with his elbows on the wood and his phone lying face up in front of him, the voicemail still visible on the screen. He kept playing it back, over and over again, trying to convince himself he was hearing it wrong, that the static and distortion were creating illusions in his mind. But no matter how many times he pressed play, the voice remained the same, low, ragged, urgent. His own voice. Older. Worn thin by something that wasn't just fear, but suffering. And every time it ended, the silence afterward pressed in harder, as though the house were listening with him. The grandfather clock chimed once, startling him. 1 o'clock. He had no memory of it ever working, yet the pendulum swung smoothly now, ticking in a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt too alive. He remembered, suddenly, his mother yelling at him when he was 7 for winding the clock when he wasn't supposed to. He hadn't remembered that moment in years. He remembered her face, furious, pale, and yet terrified, as though his action had triggered something dangerous. He rubbed his eyes. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the years away had let his mind warp childhood events into ghost stories. Still, the words of the voicemail lingered. Don't stay the night. Don't let it keep you. Get out before what? The voice had cut out. At some point, Ethan stood and made himself climb the stairs again. He wasn't sure why, curiosity, dread, or the nagging thought that if he didn't face the upstairs now, he'd never be able to. The shadows seemed thicker than they should be, clinging to the wallpaper like mold. At the top of the landing, he turned left into his childhood bedroom. The drawings were still there, faint but undeniable, scrawled across the faded wallpaper in uneven strokes. Stick figures with hollow circles for faces. Children standing outside the crude outline of the house. Some were drawn with their arms raised toward it, others with lines crossing their faces, as if someone had tried to erase them. The longer Ethan stared, the less childish they seemed. One figure, taller than the rest, stood inside the outline of the house. Its head was an uneven oval, and its eyes, if that's what they were just two deep black smudges pressed hard into the wall. Whoever had drawn it had dug into the plaster itself, leaving scratches beneath the faded crayon lines. Ethan crouched closer. His skin prickled. He could almost hear breathing behind him, but every time he turned his head, the hallway stretched empty, silent. He leaned forward and touched the scratches. They were deep. Too deep for a child's hand to make. A memory surfaced, jagged and sudden. He was small again, no older than 9. Sitting in this room, holding a crayon in his trembling hand. His mother stood in the doorway, her voice soft but urgent. Don't draw the door, Ethan. Whatever you do, don't draw the door. He gasped and staggered backward. That memory wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But he felt it in his bones. He remembered pressing the crayon to the wall anyway, his small hand compelled by something outside himself. He remembered sketching the outline of a door where none should exist. And when he looked back now, on the far side of the wall, beneath the layers of crude figures and lines, he saw it, the faintest rectangle. A door drawn in black crayon, so faint it blended with the peeling wallpaper. His pulse hammered. He reached out with one finger and traced the outline. The air shifted. The room grew colder, a draft slithering down the back of his neck. The sound of the house changed, as if all the wood and nails had inhaled together. And then, softly, from behind the wall, came the muffled sound of knocking. Ethan jerked his hand back. The knocking came again, slow, deliberate, 3 times. He stumbled out into the hallway, his breath ragged, his heart battering his ribs. The house groaned as though amused. He fled downstairs, nearly tripping on the last step. The lamp in the kitchen flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. Only the grandfather clock remained lit by the faintest sliver of moonlight spilling through the curtains. And then his phone buzzed. A new voicemail. Again, the number displayed was his own. His hands shook as he swiped to play it. Static hissed, then his own broken voice whispered. "You opened it. God help you, you opened it." The line went dead. Ethan dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the screen flashing briefly before fading to black. He bent down to snatch it up, but before he could, another sound slithered into the room. A creak from upstairs. Not just a creak. A footstep. Heavy, deliberate, pacing across the landing. Ethan's head snapped toward the stairway, eyes straining against the dark. Shadows writhed faintly at the top, just beyond reach of the moonlight. For a long moment, the house held its breath, waiting. Then, with a sickening inevitability, another step echoed down. And then another. Someone, or something, was coming down the stairs. Ethan froze at the bottom of the staircase, every muscle locked tight, his eyes glued to the shifting shadows above. The sound was unmistakable, someone was descending. The steps were slow, unhurried, as though whoever it was had all the time in the world. The old wood groaned under each press of weight, echoing through the silent house like a drumbeat. The rational part of his mind clawed for an explanation. Maybe a squatter. Maybe the realtor hadn't told him the truth, maybe some desperate person had been living here all along, tucked away in one of the boarded rooms. But deep down, Ethan knew better. The sound didn't belong to the careless shuffle of a trespasser, it was measured, purposeful, as if the house itself was moving. He wanted to run. His legs screamed for it. The front door was only 10 steps away. But he didn't move. It wasn't paralysis, not exactly, it was that subtle, insidious pressure that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. As though the house were whispering, "Stay. You came back for a reason." The footsteps reached the halfway point. Ethan's throat went dry. He couldn't see who, or what, was there. Just the faint gleam of the banister in the dark and the spaces between each step where the shadows seemed too deep, too thick, like holes punched through reality. Then, silence. No more creaking. No breath. No movement at all. The weight of that silence pressed against his skull. He took a single step backward toward the kitchen, the air rasping in and out of his lungs. The instant his shoe scuffed against the hardwood, the footsteps resumed. Faster now, heavier, pounding against the stairs as if charging straight toward him. Ethan bolted. Instinct seized him and hurled him through the kitchen, his hand clawing for the back door. His fingers wrapped around the knob, twisting hard, but it didn't move. Stuck. He yanked again, harder, until his wrist popped, but the door refused to budge. The grandfather clock chimed behind him, 3 strikes that seemed to rattle through his bones. And then, the pounding stopped. He turned, chest heaving. Nothing stood at the bottom of the stairs. The space was empty. But the shadows were deeper now, pooling at the base like a spill of ink, writhing faintly with every flicker of moonlight through the curtains. Ethan's gut twisted. The house wasn't showing him everything. It was playing with him. He forced himself forward, snatched his phone off the floor, and stumbled into the living room, where he collapsed onto the couch, gulping air as if he'd just surfaced from deep underwater. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone again. The screen lit up. Another voicemail. Same number. Same impossible truth, his own. He didn't want to listen. He knew the voice would only confirm what his eyes already screamed, but he pressed play anyway. Static roared, followed by his voice, hoarse, frantic, barely recognizable. It's not just the house. It's you. It remembers you. It needs you. Don't fight it, you can't. You'll only make it worse. It's waiting for you upstairs. Don't open The recording cut into a shriek, sharp and animal, before collapsing into silence. Ethan stared at the phone, bile rising in his throat. His reflection looked back at him in the glass, warped by the faint glow of the screen. He almost didn't recognize himself. Then a new sound drifted through the living room. Soft. Almost delicate. A child's laugh. Ethan shot to his feet, spinning in a slow circle. The laugh came again, higher this time, echoing faintly through the vents, as though a group of children were hidden deep inside the walls. He clamped a hand over his mouth. His memories clawed at him, fragments of nights long buried, lying in bed as a boy, staring at the ceiling while voices whispered from the vents, calling his name. Ethan. Come play. Come upstairs. He had told himself it was a dream. He had promised himself it wasn't real. The sound shifted, soft footsteps padding across the ceiling above him. Small feet, darting from one end of the upstairs hall to the other. Then another burst of laughter, sharp as glass. Ethan forced himself to move, to do something other than stand and drown in fear. He grabbed his coat from the back of the couch, jammed his feet into his boots, and charged for the front door. This time, he didn't even bother twisting the knob, he slammed his shoulder against it with everything he had. The wood rattled but didn't break. He rammed it again, grunting through clenched teeth, but the door wouldn't give. It felt like the house itself was holding it shut. And then, the doorknob turned, slowly, all on its own. Ethan stumbled back, his breath tearing in his throat. The knob twisted fully, the latch clicked, and the door creaked inward. Cold night air spilled across the floor. For a moment, relief surged through him, until he saw the porch. Someone was standing there. At first it looked like a silhouette, just a shape framed by the pale glow of the streetlight. But as Ethan's eyes adjusted, the figure sharpened into horrifying detail. It was him. Same coat. Same boots. Same face. But older. Broken. The skin hung sallow against his skull, his eyes bloodshot and ringed with deep shadows, like he hadn't slept in years. His mouth trembled as he stared into Ethan's eyes. And then the older Ethan spoke, voice low and urgent, just like in the voicemails. You shouldn't have come back. The air between Ethan and the figure at the door thickened like congealed tar, heavy and suffocating. The older version of himself didn't move closer, didn't blink, didn't even breathe in a way Ethan could see. He simply stood there as though he had been waiting all along, rooted to the porch like some grotesque reflection pulled free from a mirror. Ethan's stomach twisted violently, the sight clawing at his rationality, demanding an explanation his mind couldn't give. It wasn't possible. It wasn't real. And yet, here it was, undeniable, his face staring back at him, only marked with years of suffering, years that hadn't happened yet. The older Ethan's lips trembled as though words wanted to form but were fighting to get out. Finally, his voice broke through the silence, hoarse, ruined, like it had been dragged across gravel. You should have stayed away, but you couldn't. None of us could. The words sliced straight through Ethan. None of us. It wasn't just him. How many had stood in this exact place, faced their broken selves, heard the same warning, only to vanish into the belly of the house? Ethan staggered back into the living room, every nerve sparking with panic. "Who are you?" he demanded, though the answer was obvious. His own voice echoed in his ears. "What the hell is this?" The older Ethan stepped across the threshold, and with that simple movement, the door slammed shut behind him, without being touched. The sharp clap rattled the picture frames on the walls. The house seemed pleased, like a predator slamming its jaws shut on prey. Ethan wanted to bolt upstairs, to grab his bag, to smash a window, anything. But the older version of himself raised a trembling hand. "Don't," the double rasped, his bloodshot eyes darting to the ceiling as if afraid of something listening overhead. "The more you fight, the deeper it digs. Every step you take, it's already written. You think you're making choices, but it's only feeding you memories. It's only," his voice faltered, and for the first time, Ethan saw tears glisten in the man's eyes. "It's only making you become me." Ethan's heart pounded so violently he thought his chest might split. He swallowed hard, fighting the rising nausea. "If this is real, if you're me, then how do I stop it? Tell me how." The older Ethan let out something between a laugh and a sob, shaking his head. "There's no stopping it. That's the part you never understand until it's too late. You don't stop the house. The house stops you." Suddenly, a thunderous thud reverberated overhead, so loud the plaster in the ceiling trembled. Both Ethans jerked their heads upward. Then came the sound of many footsteps, dozens of them, maybe more, scurrying and pacing across the upstairs floorboards. The laughter returned too, children's voices layered with something else, something deeper, too guttural to be human. The older Ethan's face drained of color. He reached forward suddenly, gripping Ethan's wrist with desperate strength. His skin was ice cold, and the grip sent a wave of nausea shooting through Ethan's gut. "Listen to me," the double hissed, his face inches away. "Don't open the locked door. No matter what you hear. No matter what you see. That's where it ends. That's where I ended." Before Ethan could respond, the older version staggered back, releasing his grip. His face twisted in terror, as though hearing something Ethan could not. He opened his mouth to shout another warning, but no sound came. Instead, his jaw locked wide in a silent scream. And then, he was gone. Not vanished with a puff of smoke, not dissolved like a dream. He simply wasn't there anymore. One blink, he stood before Ethan, eyes bulging in horror, and the next, he was erased, leaving behind only the faint odor of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. Ethan stumbled back against the couch, shaking violently. His wrist burned where the double had touched him, a ghost of cold lingering in the skin. He pressed the heel of his palm into his eyes, trying to force himself awake, to break free from whatever nightmare had sunk its claws into him. But the house was solid beneath his feet. The creaks above were real. The silence after was real. A sound broke the stillness, a soft scrape, like nails dragging along the inside of a wall. It came from directly behind him, from the plaster itself. Slowly, Ethan turned. The wall beside the couch bulged outward, faintly, as if something on the other side were pressing against it. He staggered away as hairline cracks split across the surface, the scraping becoming more frantic. And then, clear as day, a voice whispered through the cracks. A child's voice. "Ethan, open the door." The walls shuddered with the plea. Ethan's stomach dropped. He backed toward the center of the room, his gaze darting toward the staircase, toward the shadows yawning at the top. His memories pressed harder now, like the house itself was dragging them up from the pit of his mind. A locked door upstairs. One he had never opened as a child. One his parents had warned him about, though he could never remember what they said, only their pale faces when he asked. The whisper came again, louder, many voices this time, overlapping into a chorus of children. "Open the door, Ethan. Come upstairs. We're waiting. The ceiling creaked. Dust drifted down like falling ash. His phone buzzed in his pocket. With trembling hands, Ethan pulled it free. Another voicemail. Same number. Same voice, his own. He pressed play. The recording was a whisper this time, urgent and panicked. They're not children. Don't believe it. Don't listen to the voices. If you open the door. The message cut off with a shriek. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts. His gaze crept toward the stairs again, toward the yawning dark that seemed to lean closer, as though urging him upward. And then, the grandfather clock in the corner chimed again. 4 strikes. Each one louder than the last, shaking the glass in the windows. The house was calling him. And deep down, Ethan knew he was going to answer. Ethan stood at the bottom of the staircase for what felt like hours, though the grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking every second. The house had gone still again, but the stillness was worse than the noise. It was a waiting silence, an expectant hush, like the air before a storm. The wood of the staircase looked darker than he remembered, almost black, though when he blinked, it was brown again. Dust gathered thick along the banister, but the carved grooves of the wood felt warm when his hand brushed against it, as though a pulse ran beneath the timber. He didn't want to go up. Every instinct screamed to stay rooted to the floor, to walk out the door, to never look back. But that was the cruel trick, wasn't it? The house didn't let you leave. It had been calling him from the moment he crossed the threshold, and now its pull felt almost gravitational. The whispers from the walls had gone quiet, but their echoes still rang in his ears. Open the door. Come upstairs. Ethan inhaled deeply, though the air caught in his throat, damp and heavy with the scent of mold and rot. He took the first step. The board groaned beneath his weight. The sound seemed to ripple up through the house, stirring it awake again. Another step, another groan, long, drawn out, like something in pain. His chest tightened. By the time he reached the landing, the silence of the house had shifted into a low hum, the faintest vibration beneath his feet, like the house was aware of him and pleased with his progress. The hallway stretched ahead, impossibly long. Ethan froze. That couldn't be right. He knew this hallway, he had run down it countless times as a child, darting in and out of the bedrooms. It had never been more than 15, maybe 20 feet. But now, as he stared, it seemed to reach far beyond what the architecture could contain, lined with door after door, the perspective warping and narrowing until the end was swallowed in shadow. He rubbed his eyes. Maybe it was the dust, the darkness, his mind playing tricks. But when he looked again, the hallway was the same, longer than it should be, lined with doors that shouldn't exist. And the locked one waited. He knew where it was, even without seeing it. The memory pressed against his skull like a dull blade. A door with iron fixtures, always shut, always cold beneath his fingers when he tried the handle as a child. His parents' warnings echoed faintly now, their voices muffled in his memory. Never open that door, Ethan. Never go inside. He remembered asking why. He remembered the silence that followed, the quick glance his mother gave his father, the way their faces seemed hollow for a moment, as if they'd already seen him open it one day. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket again. He hesitated, then pulled it free. No new call this time. Instead, his voicemail app was open on its own, one message highlighted. The date read, tomorrow, 12:07 a.m. His stomach dropped. He hadn't listened to this one before. His thumb hovered, shaking, before he pressed play. The voice that came through was ragged, breathless, his own voice again, but weak, barely holding itself together. It's waiting for you, Ethan. Upstairs. But the longer you stay, the less you'll remember who you are. That's how it works. That's how it gets you. Don't trust the memories. They're not yours anymore. They're the house's. If you see them, if you feel them, it's already inside you. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by static. Ethan's stomach churned, bile burning his throat. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and forced himself forward. The first door he passed was cracked open. His body tensed, and against his better judgment, he glanced inside. It was his childhood bedroom. Exactly as he remembered it. The faded Star Wars posters. The small oak desk with the carved initials in the corner. The twin bed with the blue and gray striped sheets. But what froze his blood was the sight of himself, his younger self, sitting cross-legged on the floor, toys scattered around him. The boy didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, just sat there humming softly as he stacked blocks. The sound was achingly familiar. Ethan stumbled back, his hand clutching the wall for balance. His mind rebelled, insisting it wasn't possible, but the sight was too vivid to dismiss. His younger self looked healthy, whole, real. But there was something wrong with the way the boy's shadow stretched across the floor. It didn't match his movements. When the boy lifted a block, the shadow twitched too slowly, then jerked as though catching up. Ethan backed away, his throat dry. The boy didn't look at him once, but the humming grew louder, deeper, distorted, until it was no longer the voice of a child but a drone that vibrated the walls. Ethan pulled his gaze away and pressed on. The hallway warped as he walked, the doors bending inward, the floor sloping in impossible angles. Each step dragged heavier than the last, as though the house wanted to slow him down, wanted him to linger, to soak in its illusions. His breath came in shallow bursts, sweat dripping down his temples. He forced himself to keep walking, but with every door he passed, more memories bled into him. A birthday party with laughing children, though he had no memory of friends being there. A Christmas morning where the tree reached the ceiling, gifts stacked in a mountain, though he distinctly remembered small, meager holidays. A woman singing softly in the kitchen, her face hidden, her voice like his mother's but not quite right. Each memory felt warm, comforting, tempting to embrace. For a brief moment, he wanted to step into them, to relive what could have been, what maybe should have been. But then the words from his future self voicemail clawed at his mind. Don't trust the memories. They're not yours anymore. The hallway narrowed as he approached the locked door. His pulse pounded in his ears. The door looked smaller than he remembered, but somehow heavier, the iron fixtures blackened with age, the wood scarred with deep gouges as if something inside had clawed to get out. The handle was cold, frostbitten, sending a shock up his arm when his fingers brushed against it. And then, he heard it. A voice from the other side. "Ethan, it's me. Let me out." It was his own voice. Not the older one. Not the broken, desperate one. His voice. Clear, alive, calling from inside the locked room. His stomach lurched. His legs trembled. The house wasn't just calling him anymore. It was claiming him. Ethan froze, every nerve in his body screaming at him to turn and run, but his legs refused to obey. The voice, his voice, was still calling from behind the locked door, smooth and steady, unnervingly familiar, as though a perfect recording of his own tone and cadence had been pressed into the wood. It wasn't cracked or weak like the older messages that came through his phone. No, this was stronger. Sharper. It was him exactly as he sounded in that very moment, as though another Ethan stood just on the other side of the door, waiting. "Ethan," the voice coaxed again, softer now, almost pleading. "You've kept me in here too long. Open the door. Let me out." His hand hovered over the handle, trembling. The metal radiated a terrible cold that seeped into his palm without even touching it. He thought about the phone call, the warning from his future self, don't trust the memories. They're not yours anymore. Was this another trick? Another imitation? But the longer he listened, the harder it became to deny the familiarity of that voice. It was his. There was no doubt about it. Every inflection, every tiny pause, every subtle imperfection, it was him. The sound carried the strange intimacy of hearing your own voice played back on a recording, but deeper, more invasive. This wasn't a recording. This was something alive. The door trembled faintly, rattling in its frame, as though whatever was behind it leaned close. Ethan took an unsteady step back, clutching the wall for balance, but the air around him seemed to press inward. The hallway contracted. He could feel the weight of the other doors on either side of him, their frames leaning in just slightly, enough to make the space feel suffocating. The wallpaper seemed to ripple, the pattern twisting in spirals that pointed back to this door. It wasn't just another room, it was the heart. The core. The thing the house had been drawing him toward from the moment he stepped inside. The voice changed suddenly, a sharpness creeping into its tone. "You can't keep me here, Ethan. You don't get to walk away this time." The words carried a strange duality, like a demand and a prophecy. And then came a sound that rooted Ethan to the spot, 3 slow knocks, perfectly timed, echoing from inside the door. They weren't frantic or violent. They were steady, patient, confident. They carried the weight of inevitability. Ethan's breath hitched in his chest. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. The world narrowed to that door, that voice, those knocks reverberating through the wood. Then, without warning, the doorknob began to turn on its own, the metal squealing as though unused for centuries. His stomach dropped. He had expected the lock to hold, to keep whatever was inside contained, but the sound of the latch clicking free shattered that fragile hope. The door didn't swing open. Not yet. Instead, a sliver of darkness appeared in the thin space between wood and frame. It wasn't the absence of light, it was darker than that, a density of black that seemed to bleed outward. Ethan staggered back, his shoulders slamming into the opposite wall. The hallway seemed to grow tighter around him. His pulse thundered in his ears. Then he heard it, a whisper, not from behind the door this time, but from the darkness itself, curling through the crack like smoke. It was a multitude of voices layered together, soft but clear, overlapping until they became a chorus. He couldn't make out words, only a rhythm, or rising and falling like the sound of waves crashing in a distant cave. The voices seeped into him, tugging at the edges of his mind, stirring memories he didn't want to recall. He remembered nights as a child when he woke screaming, swearing there had been someone standing at the foot of his bed. He remembered hearing faint murmurs through the walls when the house should have been silent. He remembered his parents' pale faces when he told them, their quick dismissal, their fragile smiles that never reached their eyes. Those weren't nightmares. They were echoes of this. Echoes of the thing waiting behind that locked door. The knob turned further. The crack widened. Ethan forced his body to move, stumbling down the hallway, away from the door. His shoes scraped against the floorboards, but each step felt heavier, as though the house itself tried to pin him in place. He passed the door to his childhood room again. The younger version of himself was still inside, stacking blocks, only now the boy's head turned slightly toward him. Not all the way, just enough to see the shadow of a smile curl across his face. Ethan's heart lurched. The boy's eyes, once focused on the toys, now glowed faintly in the dim light, 2 pale orbs tracking his every move. Ethan forced his gaze forward. He had to get away. He had to reach the stairs, the front door, anything to break free of this place. But when he turned the corner, the hallway didn't lead to the landing. Instead, it stretched further into shadow, bending where it shouldn't, looping back into itself. The geometry no longer obeyed the rules of the house. He could feel the house shifting around him, rewriting itself, cutting off his escape. Behind him, the door creaked. Slowly. Painfully. Reluctantly. The sound was deliberate, like something savoring the moment. Ethan's stomach dropped into ice as he realized it was opening. Inch by inch, the iron-hinged door was giving way. He ran. His lungs burned as he sprinted, his shoes pounding the warped wood. The hallway twisted, curving in impossible angles, doors multiplying, handles gleaming in the dark. Whispers swelled around him, rising in volume until they became a roar. The air thickened, slowing his movements, pressing against his chest. He stumbled, hands scraping against the wall as he fought to stay upright. He didn't dare look back, but he could feel it, the presence spilling out of that room, stretching tendrils of darkness along the floor, reaching for him. Then, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. Ethan nearly screamed from the sudden vibration. He yanked it free with shaking hands. The screen glowed with a single notification, incoming call, Ethan, tomorrow. His heart hammered as he answered, holding the phone to his ear. For a moment, nothing but static filled the line. Then a voice, his own, again, but shredded by terror, burst through. Don't let it out, Ethan. Don't you open it. If you do, there won't be another chance. You'll never get away. Do you hear me? You'll never. The line cut. Silence. And then, just as he reached another corner, just as he thought he could flee further down the endless hall, Ethan froze. The door. It was in front of him again. No matter how far he ran, no matter which way he turned, the locked door was waiting for him. And this time, it was already halfway open. From the widening gap, a pale hand slipped through. The pale hand extended slowly from the widening gap, its skin the color of candle wax left too long in the cold. Thin fingers curled against the wood, nails dark and brittle, scraping faintly as if savoring the texture of the doorframe. Ethan's breath stuttered in his chest. His mind screamed at him to move, to run again, to do something, but his body disobeyed. He stood frozen in the dim corridor, the oppressive shadows pressing in on him from all sides, his gaze locked on that fragile hand that shouldn't exist, his hand. It wasn't just similar. It wasn't merely uncanny. It was his. Every line, every scar, every faint freckle, every vein beneath the surface, it was the hand he had lived with his entire life. But there was something off about it, something that sent a tremor through his core. The hand looked tired. Not aged, not wrinkled or withered, but exhausted. The skin sagged faintly, as if carrying a weight no human body should bear. It trembled, not from weakness but from something deeper, some strain of existence that Ethan didn't yet understand. The fingers flexed against the wood, curling inward before stretching out again, each movement deliberate, testing, savoring freedom. Then came the sound, soft, wet, a slow drag like fabric being pulled through water. The gap widened further, and with it came a gust of cold air, damp and stale, that carried with it the unmistakable scent of rot. It wasn't just the sour smell of decay, it was layered with something older, something mineral and metallic, like rusted iron buried beneath damp soil. Ethan gagged as it filled his lungs, forcing him to stagger back, one hand pressed to his mouth. The whispers swelled again, pouring out from the gap in a rolling tide. Only now, they weren't distant. They were sharp, distinct, each word clawing into his mind with cutting clarity. Come back, stay with us, you don't belong outside, you never left. The chorus overlapped and tangled, voices both familiar and strange, some sounding like children, others like the cracked throats of the elderly. But threaded through them all was one voice louder than the rest, his own. Don't fight it, Ethan. You've always been here. You always will be. The door creaked wider, and Ethan saw more. Not a figure, not yet, but a sliver of the space beyond. He expected a room, a chamber, a closet, some forgotten space swallowed by the house. Instead, what he glimpsed was wrong. It was too vast, too deep, the light swallowed almost instantly by a chasm of black. Shapes moved within it, faint silhouettes, distorted forms that rippled like shadows on water. He thought he saw faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, all staring at him from that abyss, their eyes luminous and hungry, but the longer he looked, the more their outlines bled together into an endless, seething mass. His chest tightened. His thoughts scrambled. He had to leave. He had to get out before the door fully opened. But his body betrayed him again, refusing to move, as though the floorboards beneath his shoes had hardened into stone. He forced himself to glance away, searching for another exit, another path, but the hallway betrayed him once more. Every door he had passed before was gone, the walls smooth and unbroken. There was only the locked door now, except it was no longer locked, no longer closed, no longer content to wait. It was opening, with or without him. The pale hand pushed further, joined now by a second. Both hands gripped the frame, knuckles straining, pulling something forward from the dark. And then came the face. Ethan's stomach flipped as a head emerged into the gap, pale as the hands, its features unmistakably his own. Every detail was exact, the arch of the brow, the shape of the nose, the faint scar beneath the lip. It was Ethan, yet not. The eyes were wrong. They gleamed too brightly, catching the dim light of the hallway like an animal's, the irises a pale, milky gray that reflected nothing human. The mouth curled into a smile that didn't belong to him, wide and sharp, filled with a hunger Ethan had never known in himself. Finally, the double whispered, the voice spilling from its throat like silk dragged over glass. It wasn't coming through the phone or from behind the wood now. It was here, in the air, vibrating through the walls, settling into Ethan's bones. You came back for me. You couldn't stay away forever. You never do. Ethan stumbled backward, his shoulder crashing into the wall. No, the word tore from his throat, weak and broken. You're not me. The figure's smile widened further, impossibly wide, splitting its face into a grotesque grin. But I am. I'm every piece you left behind. Every night you forgot. Every scream you swallowed. You thought you escaped this house, Ethan. You didn't. You only delayed it. And now, its hands tightened on the frame, pulling harder, the wood groaning under its grip. It's time to come back. Ethan's phone buzzed violently again, the vibration rattling through his palm. He jerked his eyes down. The screen lit up once more, incoming call, Ethan, next week. His throat closed as he accepted the call with shaking fingers. Static screamed through the speaker, jagged and violent, before a voice, his voice, ragged and breathless, broke through. Ethan! Don't let it touch you. Don't, a wet gasp. It's not just the house. It's you. Every time you come back, you feed it. That thing, the line cut off with a sharp crack, leaving only silence. When Ethan looked up, the door was nearly open, the figure already half emerged. His own face stared back at him, twisted into that inhuman smile, arms stretching outward as though ready to embrace him. The whispers grew deafening. The walls pulsed with them. The house seemed to lean inward, every board groaning, every nail straining, as though the entire structure was breathing. Ethan's skin crawled as cold fingers of air brushed his cheek. The figure's hands were reaching now, stretching for him, those pale fingers aching to close around his throat. For the first time since stepping into Ashford House, Ethan screamed. And the house, as though delighted by the sound, answered back. Ethan's scream echoed down the impossible hallway, bouncing off the warped walls like a chorus of mocking echoes. His voice seemed to energize the house itself. The ceiling shuddered, the wallpaper trembling as if the building were alive, stretching and contracting with a slow, measured hunger. He stumbled backward, tripping over the warped floorboards, the edges of the hallway bending unnaturally beneath his weight. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to tear through walls, to break free, but the house had long since removed all options. There was nowhere to run. The hallway twisted again, looping impossibly, and he realized with a sick certainty that no matter how far he ran, he would always end up back at the door. The doppelganger had emerged fully now, stepping into the dim hallway with a fluidity that seemed almost wrong. It moved like it had grown from the shadows themselves, its pale skin gleaming faintly in the flickering moonlight. The smile was impossibly wide, stretching too far across a familiar face, and the eyes gleamed with a cold hunger that made Ethan's gut twist violently. It extended both arms, fingers long and impossibly thin, reaching toward him with a patient inevitability. "You can't fight it," the figure whispered, voice a warped echo of his own. "You always come back. You always feed it. You can't leave, Ethan. You've never been able to. And now, it's time to understand why." Ethan shook his head violently, staggering back into the wall, nails clawing into the warped plaster. "I'm not you," he gasped, voice raw. His words faltered, cut off by the chorus of whispers rising around him. The walls pulsed with voices, soft, cruel, layering in thousands of faint tones. Children laughing, adults murmuring warnings, his own past self crying out. They weren't just in the walls anymore. They were inside him. He could feel them in his chest, in the hollows of his skull, burrowing deeper with every heartbeat. The figure stepped closer, each movement deliberate, each footfall bending the floorboards beneath it in impossible angles. Ethan realized he could feel the weight of its presence before it even moved, like gravity itself had warped around it. "Do you remember?" it whispered. "Do you remember all of them? All the children who came before you? All the ones who never left? They're inside me now, just as you will be soon. You came back because you were always mine. And now..." Its hands reached for him. Not violently, not yet, but the proximity alone made his skin crawl. The air between them thickened, became almost viscous, like stepping through water that had teeth. Ethan felt his memories stretching and twisting, tugged in all directions. He remembered a birthday party that never happened, a Christmas morning with presents he never received, a classroom where he was laughing with children whose faces were wrong, their eyes black pits that burned into him. "You see," the figure said, voice now layered with hundreds of whispers. "You've been feeding me all your life. Every memory, every scream, every forgotten fear, you've carried them here. This house doesn't just take. It grows from what you bring. And you've brought everything." Ethan's chest heaved, heart hammering in his throat. He wanted to run, but the hallway twisted again, bringing him directly in front of the figure no matter where he moved. Every doorway he passed twisted into shadows. Every step led him inevitably closer. The floor beneath his feet quivered, vibrating with the pulse of the house. The figure's hands closed in slightly, brushing the air near his shoulders. Ethan could feel the cold seep into his skin, as though fingers of ice were tracing the paths of his veins. He screamed, clawing at the floorboards, at the walls, at anything he could reach, but nothing gave. He was trapped, fully, utterly trapped, and the doppelganger's presence pressed against him, intangible yet undeniable, bending the air, warping reality. "You will understand," it hissed. "You will stay. You cannot leave. All the children, all the past residents, they are inside me now. And soon, you will join them." Ethan tried to step back, to force a crack in the hallucination, but the walls seemed to stretch infinitely, curving around him, forcing him forward, guiding him toward the figure as if the house itself were walking him into its maw. He realized then that the locked door upstairs wasn't just a door, it was a threshold, a gateway, and everything he had seen, everything he had remembered, every voice, every memory, had been pulling him to this point. And the figure leaned closer, tilting its head, the smile impossibly wide. "It's time, Ethan. Come with me. Come inside. We've been waiting for you. You can't fight it. None of them could. None of you ever can." The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, vibrating in his chest, rattling the walls, shaking the very floor beneath him. The air thickened, pressing down, heavy as water, as though the house itself was inhaling, preparing to swallow him whole. The doppelganger's hands reached further, almost touching him now. Ethan closed his eyes, heart pounding. The house's pulse was in his own chest. The whispers were in his own mind. The figure was himself, yet not. And the threshold of the locked door upstairs stretched endlessly behind it, black and infinite, waiting to consume him. And then, without warning, the hands gripped his shoulders, firm, undeniable, cold as death. The last thought in Ethan's mind was the realization that he had never had a choice. The house had always been waiting for him. He had always been coming back. And the figure, smiling, leaned forward. The hands gripped him like iron, cold and unyielding, and before Ethan could scream again, the world seemed to shift. The hallway stretched and warped violently around him, walls folding into themselves, doors twisting like knots in fabric. The floorboards cracked and groaned under some unseen pressure, vibrating beneath his feet as though the house itself had taken a step forward. Ethan's chest heaved, panic clawing at his throat. He tried to pull back, to fight, to shove the figure away, but the hands were weightless and heavy all at once, impossible to resist, guiding him forward toward the threshold of the locked room. The door was wider now, the blackness beyond it stretching infinitely. It wasn't just darkness, it was a void, dense and almost alive, a presence that seemed to breathe and pulse in sync with his own heartbeat. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, layering over one another until the hallway dissolved entirely into sound. He heard hundreds of voices, children, adults, strangers, familiar faces, all blending into one chorus that pressed against his mind. Come in. Join us. Stay forever. Each word vibrated in his skull, tugging at memory and reason alike. The doppelganger leaned closer, and Ethan could feel the icy heat radiating from its skin, a contradiction that made his nerves scream. Its eyes bore into his, eyes that were him, yet broken and hollow, luminous in the dark. You belong here, Ethan, it whispered, voice layered with hundreds of echoes. We've been waiting for you. You've always been coming back. Always. And now, it's time to join us. Ethan stumbled into the threshold before he could resist, the room swallowing him whole. The air changed instantly, thick and cloying, carrying a damp, metallic smell that made him gag. It wasn't a room in any traditional sense. The floor beneath his feet was uneven, like cobblestones buried under decades of dirt and rot, and the walls stretched impossibly high, curving into darkness that seemed to bend reality itself. Shapes moved in the black, just beyond the edge of his vision. Shadows flickered, contorted into forms he recognized, or thought he recognized, from his memories, children he remembered from the neighborhood who had vanished long ago, neighbors who had passed away, friends from his youth whose faces blurred in nightmares. And then the figures stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each one was pale and translucent, their eyes hollow, voices silent but their presence screaming into the space around him. They moved in a procession, filling the room with impossible numbers, pressing against him, though their forms offered no resistance or pressure. Their faces twisted into faint smiles, identical to the doppelgangers, and Ethan felt a terror unlike anything he had known. They were him, and yet not him, fragments of his past, shadows of every child Ashford House had ever claimed. You see now, the figure whispered behind him, its breath brushing the nape of his neck, cold and metallic. This is what we are. This is what the house does. Every resident who returns becomes part of it. Every memory you have ever had, it feeds the walls, feeds the shadows, feeds me. Ethan's mind reeled. He stumbled backward, only to realize that the room had no walls, no floor, no ceiling in any logical sense. The space folded in on itself, a looped dimension where each step forward brought him back to the center, facing the doppelganger and the growing crowd of shadows. Panic surged like fire through his veins. No, this isn't real. I'm not. His voice broke as the air pressed harder against his chest. You are, Ethan, the figure said, its smile impossibly wide. You always have been. You can't leave. Every return, every step back into this house, it's part of you. And now, you're home. The whispers became voices he could understand now, crying, pleading, begging. Stay. Don't fight it. We've waited. You're ours. Come. Stay. The chorus of voices wrapped around his body like chains, tugging at his memories, twisting them, reshaping them. Ethan's childhood flashed before his eyes, but each memory was wrong. Faces warped into grotesque masks. Events blurred together into a nightmarish montage of joy twisted into horror. Every familiar object in his mind, the toy car he loved, the bedtime stories, the swing in the yard, was here, but corrupted, screaming for him to acknowledge it. The doppelganger stepped closer, each movement precise and deliberate. Its pale hands rose and pressed lightly against Ethan's shoulders, a touch colder than ice, yet burning his flesh with a strange heat. It's time, it whispered, voice layered with every past resident's tone. Time to become what you've always been. Ethan's knees buckled. He fell forward onto the uneven floor, trying to crawl backward, to escape the inevitable, but the shadows surged toward him, intangible yet suffocating, pressing into him with a weight that had no physical form. The walls, or whatever they were, shifted, closing in, curving around him. He could feel the essence of the house itself settling over him, claiming him, rewriting his identity with each heartbeat. And then he saw it, his own face in the crowd of shadows. Not just his doppelganger, but dozens of variations of him, children, adults, all of them trapped in the same endless void, staring at him with hollow, hungry eyes. They reached toward him, whispering the same words, their voices layered into one impossible chant, "Come. Stay. You belong here. You've always belonged here." Ethan's scream tore through the void, but the house consumed it, folding it into the shadows, making it his own. Every fiber of his being shook with terror. He knew, finally, with bone-deep clarity, that the house had never been waiting for him, he had always been waiting for it. And as the doppelganger leaned closer, a hand grazing his cheek, he realized the final, inescapable truth: Ashford House didn't just call back its residents. It devoured them, folded them into its very essence, and then waited for the next to return. Ethan's body stiffened, his mind fracturing, as the shadows closed in around him. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. The air thickened, pulsing with every lost resident's memory. And in that instant, he understood, there was no escape. The house had him. Ethan's consciousness trembled on the edge of reality as the shadows pressed closer, a tide of pale faces and hollow eyes that pulsed with an unnatural life. Every fragment of his past, memories, forgotten fears, fragments of joy and sorrow, twisted into the darkness, feeding it, making it denser, heavier, hungrier. He tried to resist, tried to claw his way back to the world he knew, but the house had claimed the final piece of him, his mind. Every thought he had ever thought was now an echo in the walls. Every step he had ever taken led here, to this culmination. The doppelganger's face hovered inches from his own, pale eyes locked on him, burning not with malice, but with inevitability. "You see it now, don't you?" it whispered, each word layered with 100 voices of those who had come before. "This is what Ashford House does. It doesn't just trap you. It becomes you. And then, it waits." Ethan's throat burned as he tried to speak. Words formed, but the shadows around him absorbed them, twisting them into voices he could barely recognize. "You've always been ours. You've always been coming back. You can't leave. You belong here." He fell to his knees, trying to push himself away, but the shadows flowed like water into his body, seeping under his skin, into his bones, reshaping him from within. The sensation was indescribable, pain, yes, but more than that, a profound swallowing emptiness, as if the house wasn't just taking his body but rewriting every memory, every instinct, every part of who he was. "Stop!" Ethan's voice finally broke through, raw and desperate, but the doppelganger tilted its head, faintly amused, and repeated his words back to him, distorted and broken, echoing across the void. "Stop! You can't. You never could." Then the whispers shifted. The voices of the other residents became clearer, not just echoes, but fully formed personalities layered over his own, murmuring, pleading, accusing. They moved with him, touching him, crawling over his skin, burrowing into the cracks of his identity. Faces he had known as a child, friends, family, neighbors, all twisted into pale, hollow versions of themselves. Their mouths opened, not to speak, but to pull him further into the darkness. Each breath he took became heavier, every inhale tinged with the memory of someone who had vanished into these walls before him. And then, finally, he understood the last, terrible truth. Ashford House had never been a house in the way he thought. It had never merely stored memories or trapped souls. The house itself was alive, yes, but it fed on the returns, on the repeated journeys of those who had once left. Every child, every resident, every visitor who dared to come back, Ethan included, was part of it now. Every memory, every scream, every fragment of fear became the building's pulse, its eyes, its voice. And in a horrifying twist, Ethan realized, the doppelganger wasn't separate from him. It was him. Every version of himself the house had ever summoned, the voices on the phone, the older Ethan, the boy in the bedroom, all had been fragments, echoes meant to guide him here, to make him understand that his return was never voluntary. The shadows surged again, pulling him forward. His body went rigid, limbs refusing to cooperate, as the void beyond the locked door stretched open like a living mouth. Ethan's mind screamed, but the house answered with the whispering of every lost resident. Come. Stay. You belong here. A cold hand, his own hand, touched his face. The doppelganger leaned closer, merging with him. Pain and ecstasy, horror and familiarity, swirled together. Every heartbeat was a drum in the vast belly of the house. Every breath he drew was filled with whispers, memories, and shadows. He tried to resist, to reclaim himself, but the final strands of individuality unraveled with agonizing slowness. The last thing Ethan saw before he was fully absorbed was the wide, impossible grin of his own face, stretched across the doppelganger's features, mirrored in every shadow in the room. The whispers reached a crescendo, a chorus of terror, anticipation, and inevitability, filling his ears and his mind. And then the silence fell. The hallway outside the locked room returned to stillness. The wallpaper hung limply, the floorboards uncreaked, the air heavy but calm. To anyone who might glance through the windows from outside, Ashford House appeared as it always had, silent, abandoned, perfectly normal. But inside, the house pulsed faintly, a living rhythm, waiting, patient, eternal. Inside the room, the shadows shifted and coalesced, forming a single pale figure with a familiar face. It moved with deliberate slowness, tilting its head to the empty space. The whispers subsided to a faint hum, almost like contented breathing. Finally, the figure whispered to the empty room. We've been waiting. And somewhere, deep in the corridors and hallways, the house exhaled. A new heartbeat joined the rhythm. A new voice joined the chorus. Ashford House had called him back, and it had kept him forever. The doors stayed closed. The windows stayed dark. The world outside continued, oblivious. But inside, the house waited, always hungry, always patient, always calling back the children who thought they had left, until they were never seen leaving again. No one ever left Ashford House. And now, Ethan would never leave either.